It's time for our second segment of Day 2 of Big Blend Radio's History, Heritage, and Culture Festival. And our next guest joining Nancy and I, as well as Big Blend military history expert, author Mike Guardia, is American educator and author Frank Thoms. And Frank is joining us to talk about his memoirs called Behind the Red Veil, An American Inside Gorbachev's Russia. He was over quite a bit in Russia, so he's going to talk about being there and also the time spent in the final days of the USSR. His book comes out again, Behind the Red Veil, out on September 15th, 2020 through Sparks Press. And you can go to Frank's website. It's franktoms.com. Thoms, it's Thoms. So you can spell it different ways, so I want to make sure you got that. So franktoms.com. And he's a teacher and an English teacher, professor, so I know I'm going to get in trouble for that. So welcome, Frank. How are you?
Oh, fine. Thank you very much, and thank you for spelling my name.
Yeah,
so often it's misspelled. Yeah, thank you.
And it's interesting. We've lived in different countries, so I go in different languages, so I trip on things all the time, and I'm like, Thoms, I wanted to go Dutch on you there for a second, but,
Well,
I don't know.
It was my grandfather's name when he came over to the U.S. in 1883 at 4 years old from Scotland. So Yep. So that's where the heritage starts for me anyway. So
cool. Hey, listen, don't mess with the Scottish. I know that. Right, Mike?
Nope.
Mike Guardia, he knows the Scottish are some of they're am I allowed to say badass on our own show? I mean, they are.
Sure. Well, they invented the world, or some people think. They did a lot of things that the world has been using since. So I never read that book, but I'd like to someday, about how the Scots invented, I don't know, everything or something, some kind of title. Anyway.
They invented
but I have no
of
Russian blood at all in me, no Slavic blood at all Anglophile as far as I know. But I had this hankering ever since I was younger to get into that mysterious riddle wrapped inside a mystery country. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this, I wanted to touch on the title of your book, Behind the Red Veil, because we always talk about behind the Iron Curtain, and then we could go to Maggie Thatcher and the Iron Fist. But anyway, we have all these titles. But Behind the Red Veil, that's a little different.
Well, yeah, I always said to myself for 25 years, my first 25 years of teaching, I taught about Russian history, Marxism, and Soviet communism in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, different ways of doing it in each decade with different kinds of students, but mostly eighth graders. And I always wanted to get behind the Iron Curtain. So I got in a plane on October 1985 with a group of people from Vermont and flew over the Iron Curtain and said that was easy. So I got in through customs, which I was nervous about. But then I realized that the Soviet Union gave us the Intourist guide and our own bus and our own international hotels, which Soviets were not allowed in. And we had our own little world going on, or was to be presented to us, and then we would go home saying how glorious the Soviet Union is. But I knew better, and I wanted to get behind that what I call the red veil. I came up with that concept, and it happened to me the first 20 minutes off the plane. A Russian woman with wild curls and 2 children stepped in front of me and asked me in Russian if there was an Englishman on the airplane, and I said no, as far as I know, in my very fractured Russian, only having had 10 days of learning it. And then we talked, and I went back to my group and ran back to her and gave her kids a couple of letters from my students, pen pal letters, and she slipped a piece of brown paper into my hands with her name, Natasha, and her phone number. And so on Sunday morning, 2 days later, I called her number with help from a American friend who knew more Russian, and thought I got her address. And then the group went off to a monastery, and I slid away and took a metro and didn't know what that was, the subway, way deep into the bowels of Leningrad, and came out and walked the street, and damn it if I didn't find her apartment and have lunch with her and her kids. And then her husband comes in kind of freaked but we got along fine by the end. So, and I saw them several times before I left Leningrad, and I saw her on my very last trip in 1994, and that's another story which you have to get in the book. It's pretty cool.
Wow. Wow. And no, Nancy, you've been reading the book Behind the Red Veil.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's well written. It moves fast, and I'm not going to, before we do an interview, we really do try to read people's books. It's not always
good for you. I congratulate you on that.
Well, thank you, but it's not always possible when we're traveling to read every single page in every book that we're given to read, but we do try. And I will finish this book because it reminds me very much of going to Kenya and as a tour guide and doing not what the tour guide was supposed to do and just deciding this looks more interesting. Let's go here.
Hey, we're kindred spirits here.
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, just let's do this because this looks more interesting than that. Which you get in trouble
Yes, exactly.
for. Yeah, but it's there's a saying. I think when you land in a foreign country, you're either up for it or you're not. And if you're not, you probably shouldn't go at all. If you're up for it, there's things that catch your eye, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I want to go over there. Even though you have this outline that you're supposed to follow, you just like, no, but look at this. It's like a kid in a candy shop. It's like, I don't know where to go first.
Yeah, exactly. Like in my first day, the next morning after the arriving on a plane, the group we had lunch, and the group was going to a monastery. And I said, nah, I don't want to do that. So I snuck away and actually did that, got away with it, and walked on the Nevsky Prospect of Leningrad, which is the Broadway of Leningrad, with 2 mini teddy bears in my pocket, looking for 2 Dartmouth students who were in Hanover, where I left from, gave me to give their friends at Leningrad State University. And, of course, I couldn't read Cyrillic very well. I didn't know where Leningrad State University was, but I'm walking with my camera bag and like a tourist, and all of a sudden 2 guys come up to me, and I said, uh-oh. And I could tell the story in the book, but I'll make it simple. They said, hey, Frankie from Hollywood. When they met me, they helped me help me piss under the street in a horrible toilet area, took me in their car, brought me to a restaurant, and as they had promised me on the street, oh, Frankie, we're going to meet these 2 girls tonight for dinner. 5 million people, me and 2 Russian guys who knew English and were black marketers. We're going to have dinner with the girls. Well, we did that night. Had dinner with the girls. I wouldn't have believed it either, but it happened. It happened.
I know. That's what's so cool.
Just
so
like
I was already behind the red veil pretty
thickly.
And I was thickly behind the red veil with black marketers and a woman who wasn't supposed to invite me to her flat in the first 2 days, and it was all downhill from there for over 7-8 trips total, and just constantly exploring, and I had an adventure doing it, and I had an adventure writing it. I tell you, I just loved the writing.
In Kenya, at the airport, this person came up and said, hey, you have American dollars. You can get more for American dollars on the streets than at the airport. I'm like,
of course.
I'm like, what? Well, I'd never flown out of the States before. So, and I was a tour guide. This was really funny because I had to pretend I'd been there before, which I hadn't. Sorry, people, but I was a good tour guide. I learned really fast.
You are a trip, young lady.
So they come up and they say, you can get more money over here. It's like, sounds good to me. I didn't know it's like selling money on the black market. It's only paper anyway. Yeah. It's not like there's anything backing it up. Who cares? So, no, it's true. Try to turn it in and get gold and see what happens. So
I just want to say, military Mike, are you going to turn my mother in?
Well, I didn't know. So they came up and they're like, "Oh, go here and did that." So I did, and I didn't know it was wrong. I found out later, and I was like, "Uh-oh,"
Yeah. Well, I was told it would be wrong, so I didn't trade money with them at all. I was told that, and I was nervous that they were going to not only take my money but also my Land's End coat and my camera bag and my clothes and leave me there in the street, But no, they were very, very friendly. Took me in their car and drove around the city. They were like buddies. That was like amazing to me.
They're nicer than the police. Sorry, policemen, but it's true.
Well, Frank, what's interesting to me is that with your story, really is about getting involved with the people and the culture, and as travelers, Nancy and I definitely have that opportunity, and it's sometimes you turn off the news and really just listen to the people that you're with, and that's really what it's about for us too.
Yep,
and I wanted to bring Mike Guardia in on the conversation. Being in military, I think there's a side of that too that maybe we forget about. That Mike, the military, when you go overseas, and it can be on these, anywhere. I know we're going to talk about Russia more, but isn't there also a part for those who are serving over there, wherever it is, that they connect with the community as well? Isn't there also that individual part where you're connecting with a foreign culture to your own, and they become part of your immediate community?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, the Army goes through pretty great lengths to give you a crash course, so to speak, on the local culture and the local customs anywhere you go. And it's expected that when you're there, you are an ambassador to your country, and they also teach you a variety of phrases that will help you get around, that will help you interact with the local populace. You learn very quickly the customs that you are expected to partake in, learn very quickly what you're supposed to do, and really more importantly, what you're not supposed to do.
Like Nancy.
Wow. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but it I think is probably one of the biggest cultural education programs that there is, and just to supplement that with the practical experience,
Yeah. I've heard that. That's true. That's good. Thank you.
And Frank, now you're in Mexico, so you do like to travel quite a bit. You've had quite a interesting life.
We decided to live here. We decided to live here and built a house and spent all our money, and now we have a fixed income, and we can live here comfortably without worrying. And during the coronavirus, we're very fortunate because we have enough money, enough food, and we can help others while we're here. And it's really a great life here, great climate, and a lot of friends. And we're staying home, but we're doing fine.
And you're writing, because it's interesting because I know you sent an email that you had actually started writing this book over 30 years ago.
Yes, I did, and I put it away when Gorbachev resigned because I figured, one, who would listen to somebody who was there when Gorbachev was there and now he's gone, and two, a lot of people were saying, well, now Russia will become a democracy, and I did not believe that, but I just said I'll hold my tongue and wait and see, and 2015 comes along, and 2016, and it's certainly not a democracy, and yes, the book might have some meaning. So I got back at it and spent 4 more years and found a publisher and an editor and a copy editor, and now I have a publicist who got me to you, Jackie Karnitz, bless her heart. And so it's been a real adventure this last 4 years, a real adventure.
And when you think about Russian history, I totally geeked out. I'm back into the geek word again. Geeked out on it when I was in high school. It was a big deal to me. Russian history, looking at how the whole, I remember reading War and Peace when I was 11, and then I had to read it again when I was 14, and then again.
Wow, good for you.
I was all into it.
Wow.
And, books are a place to be. Like, to me, that's part of my education was reading historical novels because it, as a younger I didn't understand everything that was going on, trust me. And I had to reread everything. But it was
my wife loves historical novels too. Yeah, they're really valuable.
Because I think it puts the people into a story, because history is very hard to teach and to connect with, and that's why I'm glad both you and Mike are on the show together, because you're educators, and Nancy too. She was an art teacher in Kenya, so it's like to me even what we're doing is all part of education, and it should have this way of connecting people, because history is about people and geology and nature too, but it's about people. And Russia, to me, has had this crazy whirlwind of now we're all rich and everyone's really poor over here, but it's like this, I think when you think about DNA, how this DNA has gone from generation to generation, and the poverty that has happened, just that split of no middle class, right? That seems to be from the history of Russia. That seems to be hasn't changed, really.
Now, there's a lot of, I think the people who go over now and come back tell me, wow, it's so different, it's so great. But I know when I was there, St. Petersburg or Leningrad was just beautiful buildings and stuff. But when you wander the back streets, it's a entirely different world. And when I tried to go into a school on my own, again, off the tour, and got Natasha to take me to her kid's school, which failed. We went to another school. She whipped me through back streets and back alleys and stuff that tourists never see. And just going through that, can't remember all the visuals that I had, just knew I was in another world, a real Russian world, not a red veil world. And it was fascinating. We did get into a school, and I did get into a primary classroom, and I did get into a library that was totally empty, and libraries are only fake news, quote unquote, or faux libraries, because there's no time for a Russian student to do any research because their school schedule is so heavy, and there's nothing in the library to look at except Pravda, Izvestia, Soviet publications. So where's the research? So the library was just the front. But anyway, it was fascinating to figure that out and things like that. So it's an amazing. And in college, I'll go back one more step. In college, my professor, Robert G. L. Wade at Williams College, where I went, enthralling lectures on Russian czars, unbelievable. They just hooked me because in fourth grade, I used to see My Weekly Reader charts on the wall of our Miss Karasak's classroom, and there was the big red Soviet Union, and a couple of years later, and later on in school, red China, and all this red on this map of black and white, and the thoughts and the fears and the anxiety that created. That was the first bug I had of it that didn't really come out until my second year of teaching, when my mentor said, teach Russia, teach communism as it is. Don't teach it as a bad thing. Teach it as a decent thing for millions of people in the world. So I did. Didn't get in trouble, but I did it. Had fun.
It's interesting. When I grew up, as I'm growing up, we had all the air raids.
She's still growing
air raids. Yeah, I'm still learning, so I'm still growing.
Me too.
So there was all the air raid sirens go off, and you'd dive under your desk and cover your head and all that, and it was all from the Russians are going to attack, and then there was the whole thing, like what I was told was the Russians were going to go to the moon and put this great big mirror on the moon and somehow point it at the sun from the moon and burn us all up. That's what I was taught.
That I never heard. That's a good one.
But seriously, and as a kid, you believe it because that's what your parents are saying. That's what your teachers, thank you very much, teachers, were saying. Seriously. And then when you get out and about after high school and you get your first job and you start working, you realize, wait a minute. I just went through how many years of complete whatever. Math was good, science was good, English lit was good, but then when it came to social studies and history, whoopsie.
Well, you didn't have my classes. I'm sorry. I wish you had. I really tried hard to deal with the world as it really was. It really works. Right? I hated textbooks because they were always outdated, and they're dull and they're hard to follow, and you can't learn from them. And so I tried to create all my own stuff, and had a wonderful time. So
you sound like Mr. Holland from Holland's Opus, reading, you've written all the books on teaching from the middle of the room, inviting students to learn. I love that. Just
awesome.
My first book.
To me, I think students need to have that interaction. Mike, you were talking about this on one show where you ended up on another guest segment, remember? I think it was the first time.
Right.
The Battle of New Orleans. What was it? What did you do with your students? You actually made them do the battle? Like, what did you do?
Yeah, so when I was teaching down at San Jacinto College, I figured that the best way for me to teach about the Battle of New Orleans was to actually split my class into two groups. To have one group of students to have one group of students line up pretending to be the British troops, and then have another group of students line up pretending to be the American troops. And then I would take those two groups of students, and then I would put them into lines of infantry and lines of artillery, and I would maneuver them against each other out in the quad, and I would have them maneuver against each other according to authentic drill commands, like columns of platoons, column right, march.
Oh, jeez.
Cool.
Did anybody win?
Yes. Surprisingly, the Americans took the fight to the British again, and despite some confusion from our artillery section as to what they were supposed to do with their wads of paper and their little foam dodgeballs, the Americans.
Yeah, I had wads of paper too.
Forces.
I know that one. That is fat. I did a Civil War thing one year in the gym, blue and gray, with generals who organized their teams into groups of either groups of 1, 2, 3, or 4, and then they got all lined up and ready to go. And I had these little cards in my hand that I made, and it said, move 2 steps backwards, or stand still, or move 2 steps to the left, or something like that. So all the troops on the floor on both sides had to do that. And then when they touched each other, the group that had more people in it, the other group had to collapse on the floor. So that took care of that. And then the guys with the cannons, wads of paper, Mike, threw wads of paper. And if a wad of paper hit somebody, the guy had to fall. It was a riot. I can't remember who won or lost, but it was so much fun just to get these kids to sort of feel a little bit about what war was like by actually doing it in the gym.
I love that. That's cool. I think that's the interactive, that kids get to take responsibility of their actions. And I think that's where teaching,
you really learn.
Especially you really learn, but you can also you could go into different countries with things like that, because then you're acting. You know what I mean? So it goes beyond language barriers, right? With that kind of
you're making it personal. You make it personal. And that
I did a lot of what called open education kind of things in the 70s. I had class with 5th and 6th graders together, working together, no formal lessons, sometimes a formal presentation of a concept, but they would play together outside on the soccer field. We had co-ed soccer instead of boys and girls soccer. We did things like that. It was, I tell you, teaching is for me, was such a world. I was in a place where I could just basically do what I created and got support for it, and it was really fun. And the whole Russian thing, each year, each time I did that, each decade was different, but it was just wonderful to feel like I could do what I thought was necessary, not what a textbook told me to do. So it was really fun.
That's
I like that.
I think it's important, and it's scary now. I mean, now we've got the internet, and it's like, everyone don't read just everything on Wikipedia. You can't. As much as people can experience, travel and go somewhere, I think is important, and read books. That's important too. And just in regards to being in Russia and then also being around students, is there really a difference in individuals and their joy to learn? Something that we've seen living in Africa is there's a joy to learn. Like, if something happens, a kid will walk, 4 or 5 miles to school and be proud about it, still go home and work. But education, I know that Nigeria, they're opening some of the schools back up, even with this COVID situation, and the kids want to go back. They take this so seriously. So for me, there's a difference. And I'm generalizing. There's a difference between Africa and here in the eagerness to learn.
Well, that's a great question to ask about the Soviets, because basically speaking, this system that the Soviet kids were in, and I taught in Leningrad, in Moscow, and Kazakhstan in 4 different schools. 2 of them I was an official U.S. exchange teacher, and 2 of them I found on my own. The early experience, I noticed all the uniforms, the kids all stand up at the same time. They raise their hands with the right hand on the elbow, and then they only stand. They stand when they have to speak. But there was no eagerness to learn. The eagerness was to get to know the American. That's what I felt when I was there, because they wanted to know what America was like and all that. But what was curious is that they basically were succumbing to a very oppressive system that both teachers and students had to get through together. There was a lot of cheating, and a lot of cheating was done with teachers looking through the fingers, which means they saw it, but they did not deal with it. And there was a lot of prompting where kids would whisper to each other answers when they were standing to talk. So it was a very much of a collective system. And if kids did something bad, I never saw one student in the office being punished, because if one student would never be punished in a collective when all students are responsible for whatever happens to the whole group all the time.
Wow.
So if the kids did something wrong, like say one group of mine skipped a class and went outside to play freeze tag, and then came in exhausted at the end of the period, I'm there observing that class that day, and my friend Irina, my boss, was there. She scolded the students, but nothing ever happened. Nobody took the blame because they were all to blame. I thought maybe Gleb, one of the kids, was the organizer because he seemed like that. Not me, he said. We all did this. So could you imagine having 30 kids come after school to detention because something happened, or two groups of 30 kids? So there was never any detention. There was never anybody in the office. But, they were disciplined. Don't worry about that. That's a different story. But it was fascinating to watch and to be part of, and to really appreciate the collective spirit too was also kind of interesting. I really liked that, and I compare it a lot in the book. I talk about that a lot. So
did they take accountability as a group, or they just don't take accountability at all?
Well, they basically don't take it at all. If the principal, the director, Elvira Nikolaevna, didn't like a group, the whole group was going to have a dance that one night, and she said, "You're not having it. You've been bad, no dance." That was it, done, over. And so nobody came, and nobody had a dance. And another time she would say one afternoon, "You guys have been so good, you can have a dance tonight." And boy, they would have that dance that night. And it's fascinating. But then you switch over to Kazakhstan, 19, it was 5 years, 6 years, 5 years later, and I'm teaching kids in the same Soviet uniforms, the same thing, but something was different. It was the Gorbachev was beginning to fail. I don't know if people knew it or felt it. And we ended up in a lot of classes not doing the Soviet lessons and not doing my humor, and I broke a lot of rules. But the kids wanted to talk about afterlife and reincarnation. So we were in a whole different world in the same country 5 years later, and Gorbachev resigned about 6 months after I left. So it was fascinating. The whole experience was just riveting for me.
I think it's interesting, even looking at Cuba right now with and who knows what's going to happen now with being open to America and everything, but watching how their lifestyle and how entrepreneurial the people of Cuba are. They are entrepreneurial, even though here was this communist thing going on. They were entrepreneurial and still are. I mean, even with their cars and everything, it's really fascinating. What I wanted to ask is, they're interested in you as the American, and I've always been the immigrant. Like, everybody was fascinated with you, and because I went to almost 16 schools, 15 or 16. We can never get it right. And I was always the new kid on the block, and everyone's fascinated. And then it's like, okay, now you're one of them, and then you're like the odd one out because you're not from there, right? So it's like it was always like. I had to learn to have a thick skin, basically, through all of this. And it's interesting because people wanted to know the American, and I didn't have an American accent. I always had an accent from wherever I was last.
But you were British.
But
you were
as
British,
kids,
and then you were Asian.
But as kids, because Mike, did they want to know the American because they wanted to know the lifestyle and compare it with their own? Did they want more of the Western lifestyle? Because I'm looking at Victor Belenko, who bailed Mike in your story. Here he was, and it's after the late 60s, early 70s, right? He's like, I'm out. So did that start as a young man, or where are they on all of that in regards to the youth?
Well, in The case of Victor Belenko, I think the disenchantment really hit critical mass after he became an adult. You know, he may have had some underpinnings when he was a child, but you know, now that he was within the higher echelons of the Soviet government, and he had met all the metrics, necessary to move up, from being a regular proletariat to being someone who was, trusted within the ranks of the Soviet military. I think once he saw just firsthand how broken the system was and how inefficient it was and how they talked through two sides of their mouth, that's really what set him off on the course to, you know what, I could probably have life a lot better if I were living in the West. And ironically enough, one of the things that really set him off, and one of the things that I don't think is adequately touched on, in any biographical sketch that's out there on him, is just how bad his home life was deteriorating. Because I talk a little bit about this in the book, and I say that, here you have this distinguished MiG pilot who, by all outward appearances was a model Soviet citizen, yet his wife was fed up with being a military spouse, and she had announced, hey, I'm going to divorce you, and after I divorce you, I'm going to take our son and I'm going to move back into our parents' home. Well, hearing those words from your spouse in Soviet Russia and the Soviet divorce laws being what they were, that was effectively a death sentence, because I think Victor Belenko knew at that time that if his wife announced that she was divorcing him and she was going to take their son, there was no legal mechanism in the Soviet Union to prevent that kind of parental alienation. And what a lot of people I don't think realize is that the first country in the world to invent the concept of no-fault divorce was the Soviet Union, where you could go before any magistrate in the USSR and say, I no longer want to be married to my spouse, and I don't have to prove that there was a shred of wrongdoing. I just don't want to be in this marriage anymore. And they would give you the communist seal stamp of approval. Okay, effective immediately, your marriage is now null and void.
Wow, that's fascinating.
I know that.
Go ahead. Yeah, so go off and do great things for Lenin and Stalin. The divorce and family laws in the former USSR were horrible. And I really think that was I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back for Belenko, because he said, okay, well, I could probably keep my nose to the ground and avoid making enemies and go through the motions of being a Soviet pilot, because a lot of his comrades on his left and right were doing that. But when he's dying inside, knowing that, when he's dying inside, knowing that he's working for a corrupt system, and and his family life is falling apart with no rights and no type of legal representation, he's like, you know what? Screw this! I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And it's ironic in the fact that when he came here to the U.S., he actually married an American woman, and they had 2 sons, but he's never officially divorced his Russian wife.
That can happen. Well, it's a wild story. I mean, Mike, but Frank, going to you with this, I mean, being immersed in was there unrest about people wanting to leave? I mean, so there was this family life and these different laws with Victor, but what about what you experienced, being over there and being immersed in the youth, especially the youth?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is there is like this word called pokazuka, which was based, or like the idea of the Potemkin village, which Gregory Potemkin set up for Catherine the Great, put up these facades of buildings along the river as her group with foreigners were on this boat, and you keep moving to different parts of the river with these facades, looking like that Russia was really a prosperous country. And in school, there's a lot of, I'm trying to think, I just lost the thought. There's a lot of, like, for example, the director of my school was the first school I taught in, Elvira. She was really an amazing person, and she was pretty fluid with things. And Gorbachev, after all, was inviting this culture to look at itself and consider what communism really meant to them. And she was not really for Gorbachev, but her school was very progressive. But when an inspector came in and saw these kids walking around with pins besides Lenin, other pins that I had given them or they had gotten on the street, pins for peace or whatever, she sent out a directive the next day putting out a directive that said, reminding them that no student is to wear any adornments that were not official or something like that. And she herself took off the ones that I had given her. So what happens? What do the kids do? They put the pins under their lapels. And then they walk down the hall and flip their lapels open to show me or others what their pins were. So it's this whole pretend way of being, but the underlying was that the people were they were really, I think, at this particular time in Soviet history, the very last days of it, were really struggling to find a way to have themselves count more, not just be a part of the collective, but to be a person. And one girl I have write about in the book, and I have a chapter I call She, so I don't give her name because there's so much information that I have about her, that she invited me to her communal apartment to meet her parents, who had a videotape player in the apartment, which was unusual. It was communal with shared kitchen, shared bathroom, only one room. And later they had a better apartment. But she invited me to that. The director, of course, found out, and this girl was not allowed to participate in a space bridge with the U.S. She's one of the best English students in the school because she had violated protocol, and she had the American teacher in her flat. So it was and the story, her chapter is really fascinating because she's the one who taught me how Soviets really cheat. And I have a big pen to prove it in my pen case here. Yep. Fascinating person. Fascinating story. I mean, I can't believe the stories that come out that are underneath, behind the red veil, underneath what I called in the book. I had another metaphor I used was the matryoshka, which is the Russian nesting doll. And I wanted to get inside the Russia, not the Russia that shows out front, you know, the tourist tour and all that, but what's inside. So that metaphor and the red veil metaphor go throughout the book. It was fun.
So I know that it's Russia, but I'm looking at it through some eyes of a person who's lived in, you know, third world countries, and just kind of what everyone's perception was of America, and just that kind of like you know, over here people either love or hate Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela, and I could go and do a whole show on the Mandelas and tell the truth. And we've lived through the riots, and we've lived through
like
necklacing, where they throw a tire around a child and they pour gasoline and set the child on fire. And that was the truth that happened in South Africa when the changes happened. Not Nelson Mandela's doing as such, but Winnie Mandela, and she took over media and broadcasting, and then we had to leave. So, but anyway, but
for
we've
good
been
reason.
through some of that. But people have these perceptions of South African, Kenyan politics and what was going on. And it's really hard to explain everyone's side of a story because almost everyone has a correct side of the story. And so, I was just going to say, did you feel that from the Russian side, what do they know about us, like America? Do they, I mean, how much do they know?
Yes and no. Yes and no. The official textbooks and writings about the U.S. are that there's homelessness living in the streets, that people don't have income, that teachers abuse kids and are mean to kids and so on. They have this whole official. I can't give you all the characteristics of it, but the idea of coming into a school as an exchange teacher, I felt as though I was the United States of America because they hadn't really heard about who we are and what we were like, what I call the good parts of our country, which I still believe very strongly in. And I sort of felt like I was a mini mythic superhero because kids would just constantly ask me questions and take me to cafes and tell me their stories and all the things underneath what was going on. But they wanted to know who we were and what we were like. Yet one of their students in that school had been an official traveler to the U.S. and came back, and he came back with a stilted view, basically, of the country because he was protected by his chaperones about what he really saw and understood.
Exactly.
But a lot of these kids that I talked with were really probing and looking for information, and I was a source for a lot of it, and I tried really hard, and I tried hard to listen to what their questions really were and where they were coming from. It was it was an amazing experience. You're totally alert as a person all the time when you're in a foreign country like that. I was in England for a year too, and I know what that means. But in Russia, it was like you're totally alert. Which you guys know because you've talked to me about your 60 countries traveling and stuff. I'm so amazed by that.
We spent time. We did live in England too, but it's interesting. I wanted to ask Mike on
you
the
knew the language
side.
there, huh? That's good.
Yeah, there's good language there. But Mike, in the military, when you go overseas, is that the same thing? Because you start, getting involved with the community. Do the kids want to know? Because I remember there were classic, photos of soldiers, and that's part of the Marlboro cigarette thing. At the end of the day, that whole, there's I don't know, you get to know, the kids want to know from the soldiers. Doesn't that happen?
Well,
they want to know what the
kids will gravitate pretty much towards anything that's interesting. And
well said. Said.
Yeah. And one story that I can actually give you comes not from anything I've experienced, but from as part of the interview process that I was doing when I wrote The Fires at Babylon. When I was interviewing a handful of Desert Storm vets right after the ceasefire, and they had a change of mission from destroying the Republican Guard to actually being a Johnny-on-the-spot peacekeeping force in the city of Anasaria. A lot of the veterans told me that the only enjoyable part of that latter part of the Gulf War was being able to interact with the children because they were fascinated by what stories the American soldiers could tell them, and they had a slew of questions like, "We've heard this about America. Is this true?" And not only that, just how friendly they were and how much they wanted to play with the troops, and more to the point, how much they would become enterprising capitalists. Like they would come up to a soldier and say, "Hey, GI, if you have a chocolate bar, I'll give you this old Iraqi AK-47, or I'll give you this Iraqi Army hat, or just anything of value, anything that you could take home as a war souvenir, and just have a child want nothing in return except a chocolate bar, as time went on, however, they started demanding more things. Like instead of chocolate bars, it eventually became Sony Walkmans and stuff like that.
Walkmans, yes. Remember those, everyone? Remember Walkmans?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, do it.
Oh my gosh. Did that happen to you, Frank, in Russia? Did you take specific things over for the kids? Or are you
I was
allowed
not. A lot of people would go over with a lot of American jeans and stuff like that, but I didn't. I went over with just my own stuff to be a teacher. I wasn't thinking about being an ambassador by giving away American goods to somehow make them feel better. I don't think I did much of that. I gave some things, but what I got, which is amazing to me, is I came home when I wrote the book. I was saying this started out. I have about a dozen titles that I used to write the book. Like Teacher in the Rye, which is a guy called me that. Russians as People. An American Teacher in Gorbachev's Soviet Union was similar, and also Pokazuka, Insights into the Russians, all kinds of different things. But basically, when it came to writing it, now I lost the train of thought here. Oh yeah, it was my wife kept saying to me, "You're not just writing about the Russians; you're writing about yourself." I said, "No, it's about the Russians." But when I actually worked on it and got some more feedback, it's a book about what I call a cultural memoir. It's about the Russians, but it's about me with the Russians because I was changed. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I went to places I shouldn't have gone. I was being myself that endeared myself to my students but caused anxiety among my Russian colleagues. I could be me without pretense, but kept me from succumbing to others' expectations. And I could listen, and I did a lot of that. And when I listened to Kazakh 16-year-olds share their thoughts about reincarnation, that wouldn't have happened if I had been fulfilling the Soviet curricular system like a Soviet teacher. But I was me as a teacher in the Soviet system and got away with it.
That's wild.
I mean, nobody told me not to do it. Very interesting. In some cases, I was watched by a lot of teachers because they would bring their kids in and watch the American. But I would break from the text and get into humor and put funny drawings on the board and walk up and high five kids and do stuff with them. They've never used to that, but that's the person I was. So I said, I got to be me. I can't be a Soviet teacher. I got to be an American teacher. And I was kind of a crazy teacher as it was, but that's the way it was. And so I think they loosened up, and kids would just raise their hands and jump out of their seats almost instead of keeping their elbows on the table. So I said maybe I'm an Aladdin releasing their genies. I felt that sometimes. So
I think that's exciting when kids get to have that, because then they become excited about studying and learning, and you're already opening the door by being, a transplant from another place. It's like, ooh, there's a creature.
And it was all in English because my Russian was terrible. It was all in English, but they had to develop and draw on any English they had to get to be understood. So it encouraged their language development too, which was one of my jobs. So.
That's amazing. I mean, that cultural exchange, I think we need more of it in the world, And right now here we're all like isolated. We're still traveling, but we're traveling in a weird, isolated way. We're masked. It's behind the blue mask is what we're at. That's where we are. But it's,
behind the blue mask.
I know. Yeah, it's like I feel like what's the actor's Nancy the Mask. Gosh, you always laugh about it. But anyway,
Jim Carrey.
Yeah. I know. It's like time that everyone should rewatch that. But this whole thing is we still can unite on technical devices and software like Zoom and all of that. So, and reading and doing all kinds of things, watching movies and just still connect and reach out. We do have that ability these days, which I think is great. And
music from around the world too. Oh my gosh. All over the world, they're playing the same song.
Yeah,
wonderful.
It is. That is pretty true. And you don't have to understand the lyrics to understand music. But now, would you go back if someone handed you a ticket? Would you go back?
Well, I was going back last June to reunion with my colleagues and some of my students, but the coronavirus interrupted the trip. But it's still on my docket, and if it gets open and free again, I'm going to go back to now St. Petersburg and see some old friends and see some students and just get a feel and a taste of what it's like, 30, 40 years later. So, I can't wait to go back.
What is something you think that people don't understand about Russia, like being on the American side? What do you think they don't get?
They don't get that they are people who get up in the morning, have breakfast, lunch, go to work, shop, have kids, become aunts, uncles, nephews, nieces, grandparents, have frustrations with their government, argue with each other, love each other, kiss each other, hug each other. I mean, the list is, they're people. And they were people 30 years ago, and I could guarantee that if I went back and spent as much time now, even in a more closed society with Putin as the dictator, so to speak, the people would still be like that in their own flats. They're away from Big Brother, and they're on them. And they would be I think they'd be much the same. So that's my opinion.
That's exactly what I would have to say about everywhere I've been, that the people are the same. It's the governments who are different, and then you all have to just sit back and take a look at who's in the government, whether it's a dictatorship or it's electoral, the personality of the person who wants control. That's what I'm going to say about that. And
well,
so you want to go.
And I think we can read a lot into that.
I think you want to go the opposite of the people who want to be elected.
Yep. Here we go.
Then that's
on all levels.
Here we go.
All levels and all parties.
Gosh.
Here it is.
Uh-oh.
I know, but no, I don't want to get into all. But no. But before we go, Mike, I wanted to know if you had any comments or questions for Frank before we go.
I'd be curious.
Well, Frank, yeah. Well, Frank, I got to tell you, your project sounds fascinating.
Thank you.
There's only so much that historians like me who write from a military perspective, will ever grasp about the people themselves and knowing it from that sociological standpoint. So I think your work brings a very much needed dimension to to studying the whole Soviet-Russian era.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
about it brings every part because it really does end up being about people. That's what history and culture is about. It's about.
Yep.
We all got to unite,
It is.
and because you said about music, right, Frank? We're gonna have to play this song because it's an awesome song. It's from one of our favorite bands, Kwame Bene and the Shakedown. Now, Kwame is from Nigeria. Excuse me, not Nigeria,
Wow.
Ghana. I was talking about the
Ghana.
Nigerian schools opening. Ghana. He's from Ghana, and he lived in London for a while, West London, and he was in Harlem when he started Kwame Bene and the Shakedown, and now he's in New Jersey with a wonderful, growing family and an amazing band, and he's all about unity, peace, love, and unity. And this song is from their latest album. It's called Roots, Rock, and Universal Love, and it's called World on Fire. And it's really, when you think about history, we've got to learn from history, and I think these conversations today have really showcased that. And we want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Frank, for joining us. Everyone,
You're welcome.
It's Frank Thoms. It's THOMS, Frank, and that's his website too. So go to frankthoms.com. And also, go get his book. It's out September 15th, 2020. You can pre-order it. Go to Amazon, all those places, and get it. And, of course, keep up with us at BigBlendRadio.com. Our next show is on Wednesday. We're going to be talking about how soldier dogs in World War II. We're going to be talking about anthropology, and we're going to talk about Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. So that's our Wednesday, day 3 of our history show. I know. We're going all over the place, man. I tell you what.
Yeah.
Can I just say how much I appreciate you inviting me on, and if you ever want a third conversationalist, let me know. I'd be delighted to join you again. It's just been an absolute delight. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. As we've had a blast having you on the show, and I'm so glad we got your book. I can't wait to dig into it. I know Nancy's, she swooped in and took that. She swooped in and took it. She got it.
Okay.
She got it. And everyone, keep up with Mike at MikeGuardia.com. Thanks, Mike, for sitting in for both segments, your segment and Frank's. It's been a great time having you back on the show.
Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, thank you, Mike,
It's always
too.
a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely, Frank. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Yep, pleasure meeting you too, and hearing you have a marvelous voice. I could listen to it all day.
I know, right?
Very calm and very, very clear,
and
what you say you know about, which is really nice. So
it's got radio voice.
I know, and
Yeah,
he teaches me.
I appreciate that.
I just want to thank you because he teaches us stuff. I'm saying teaches me because, I need help on that. It's like there's a big plane. He's like, no, this is a fighter jet.
there's so much to learn in the world. My goodness. Okay.
I
Isn't
know.
it fun, though?
Well, it's been great. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Here it is. World on Fire from Kwame Bene and the Shakedown. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Take care, guys.